Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
The denial of full and free and fair elections is the most un-American thing.
as the country weighs voting rights, we talk with two legal professionals about the nationwide debate.
Decay, crisis, massive funding, and then rinse and repeat.
Infrastructure is front and center as Illinois' governor has an audience with the president.
This is a draft bill. We intend to show it to all of the stakeholders.
Our Spotlight Politics team on Senate Leader Chuck Schumer's push for the federal legalization of cannabis.
A police record is not something someone should walk out of high school with.
As schools decide whether or not to keep police officers on campus, a look at an alternative approach.
There was a stigma that it was considered a service that was only needed if you were really having a mental breakdown.
Stigmas surrounding mental health in Latino communities, how some are breaking cultural barriers. The newest face on the Chicago Tonight team, Joanna Hernandez, has that story.
And from glorious Grant Park to Ravinia, music and dance are back in a big way this summer. Theater critic Hedy Weiss is returning too to talk about some recent shows. But first, some of today's top stories. A former Chicago Public Schools principal is charged in an alleged scheme to collect fraudulent overtime pay. According to a federal indictment, Sarah Jackson Abdelal, who is the former principal of Brenneman School in Edgewater, told school employees she would pay them for overtime hours they didn't work. She's alleged to have directed the employees to give her that unearned pay for school expenses, but then she pocketed the money. She's charged with 10 counts of wire fraud and accused of collecting some $200,000. A group of Chicago residents wants to take over the normally hyper-political process of redrawing the city's ward maps. A 13-member group billing itself as the Chicago Ward Advisory Redistricting Commission put out a call today for city residents to weigh in on how they believe the city ward maps should be redrawn. The commission says it will hold hearings over the next several weeks with the goal of submitting a map to the council that at least 10 aldermen can approve. If that happens, the group says the map would then go to a voter referendum.
We are going to continue, again, collecting that community of interest data until the census data is released mid-August. Based on that testimony, the oral, the written, and the submitted maps, we will be drafting a ward map. We'll present these drafts to community members for feedback and adjust them based upon that feedback until we come to an agreement on the best possible map.
A new mural on the west side pays tribute to a Chicagoan killed by gun violence. The Neftali Reyes Jr. Memorial Anti-Gun Violence mural was unveiled today in Humboldt Park. Reyes was 19 and an aspiring pitcher when he was killed in December of 2017. The mural was advocated for by Neftali's parents, who say they want to shine a light on the problem of gun violence in the Humboldt Park community.
Due to a senseless act of gun violence, his dreams were taken away. And so were my dreams for him. But he made an impact in his community.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker was among a handful of governors and mayors who scored an invitation to the White House today. His visit comes as the primary for the 2022 governor's race is less than a year away. It also comes as President Joe Biden's aiming to shore up support for a pair of big spending packages. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Brandis, Governor J.B. Pritzker hasn't officially announced that he's running for a second term yet, but you can bet that he would not mind one bit that federal infrastructure plan passing, seeing as it would mean a whole lot of projects coming to Illinois. Of course, Governor Pritzker already has a whole lot of ribbon-cutting opportunities in the state because of, in 2019, a bipartisan deal that he signed into law that created Rebuild Illinois. That was a long-awaited $45 billion infrastructure package. Now, projects for that are ongoing. Construction, anyway, that is you may well know if you hit the road. Now, Clark Carricker is VP of Government Affairs for the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, and he actually used to work for the State Department of Transportation. He says that Rebuild Illinois means that the state is in a great position if Congress does, as he put it, get its act together and pass a federal infrastructure package, because Illinois essentially already has the cash on hand, ready and waiting for a change. for this very purpose. And that money could be used, because of Rebuild Illinois, to get federal matching dollars to help pay for capital projects in state. You can think of it like having a BOGO coupon if you're shopping for something really, really pricey.
Infrastructure is one of the things that Illinois as a state can brag about versus our sister states, and that it's up to us to keep it that way.
Now, mind you, there is, of course, this issue of how to pay for all of that building at both the federal and the state level. Illinois is paying for Rebuild Illinois through increases on those license plate stickers, but also through gasoline taxes. The state tax on a gallon of gas ticked up a tiny bit at the start of the month. Character says, however, that as more people are driving electric vehicles, as in those that don't use gas, that means that a gas tax is not the reliable funding stream that it once was.
For policymakers, both in D.C., but also here in Springfield and in Chicago, it's going to be, how do we pay for the next capital bill? And nobody has a great answer, but there are a lot of answers. And if we don't get to that crisis level, now we think is the time to begin that discussion. Whether that is tolling on urban interstates, certain lanes, so that we can pay for upgrades that way, whether that's a vehicle mileage tax like the state of Oregon's looked on, or is that a way for making sure that electric vehicles pay their fair share?
Now, in Washington, there is a bipartisan deal on a traditional infrastructure plan. And today, during that meeting with governors, including Pritzker, President Biden said that it is in good shape, even if that question isn't full. The question of how to pay for it isn't fully answered yet.
Going to get down to what the Congress wants to do. I've laid out how I think we pay for it, and we have an agreement. We have an agreement. There may be slight changes. I'm not sure what may happen, exactly how, but it's going to be paid for.
Pritzker, meanwhile, called that meeting productive and says that he shared with the president how Illinois passed that rebuild plan that he noted led Illinois to getting top ratings for infrastructure, including from a rankings from CNBC. Now, given that Illinois already has that $45 billion dedicated toward capital projects, I asked Steve Donahue why a federal infrastructure program is needed. Donahue is with the engineering firm Horner and Schifrin. He also chairs the American Council of Engineering Companies of Illinois. He says Illinois' infrastructure program was mostly about maintenance and repairs.
You know, receiving federal funds would allow us to spend more money on modernization and expansion of facilities such as the 290 corridor, the Stevenson, even downstate I-255, I-270, and US 67. So we could transition Illinois from just a repair and maintenance mode into a modernization mode.
He says that things had gotten bad prior to this current infrastructure plan. Estimates were that half of Illinois bridges were deteriorating.
If it doesn't happen now, I think it's a matter of, we kick the can down the road a little bit. We can maybe delay it, but the need is still going to be there, and it will have to be dealt with eventually. And the longer we delay investing in infrastructure, the more it's going to cost down the road.
Members of Illinois' congressional delegation invited the president's point man on infrastructure and transportation to see this for himself, extending an invitation saying Illinois has been a leader in transportation investment, but additional support and coordination at the federal level is desperately needed. Now, he has accepted. The U.S. Transportation Department confirms Secretary Pete Buttigieg is visiting the Chicago area on Friday. Where exactly he's going is not yet public, but the invitation suggests that Buttigieg visit projects, including recent innovations at Midway International Airport, the I-80 bridge over Des Plaines River, Chicago's Union Station, and the CTA's ongoing Red and Purple modernization program. Now, as for what the governor and the president talked about today at the White House, it wasn't all infrastructure. The governor's office says that Pritzker also went to D.C. with plans to talk with Biden about Illinois' depleting unemployment insurance fund and also combating this constant issue, combating gun violence. The governor also met with the White House's coordinator for the COVID-19 response. Brandis, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. And now to Paris for a look at the nationwide battle over voting rights. Paris.
That's right, Brandon. So earlier this week, Texas Democrats fled that state to block Republican efforts to change election laws. This comes as Republican lawmakers in numerous states have pushed forward legislation to tighten ballot restrictions. Illinois, meanwhile, has gone the other direction, expanding voter registration and absentee voting. And joining us now with their takes are Zach Smith, a legal fellow with the Heritage Foundation, and Anil Shablani, chief counsel with the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. Welcome, both of you, to Chicago tonight. Thank you for being here. I want to start with you, Anil. What is concerning to you about that bill in Texas and about bills being considered or passed across the country?
Yeah, thank you, Paris. We are really concerned about the Texas bill, and Texas is not alone in these efforts to restrict voting rights. So just in 2021, there have been at least 33 new laws that have been passed restricting voting rights, restricting access to the ballot, from all things including limiting early voting hours, eliminating mail-in voting options, removing drop boxes. So all of these efforts that are really putting up burdens for access to the ballot that disproportionately affect certain groups. And we're concerned about that trend, and we're concerned that at a time where we should be promoting civic engagement and the broadest access of the exercise of the constitutional right to vote, we're seeing states head in the other direction.
And Zach Smith, Republicans predicate these laws on the need to root out voter fraud, despite no evidence that there was widespread fraud in the 2020 election. In fact, evidence that it was a very secure election, high voter turnout. So then why are these laws necessary, do you believe?
Well, look, I think any voter fraud is too much. The goal of these laws and any reform measures should be to make sure that as many people can vote as possible, while making sure that every legally cast ballot is counted and that no illegally cast ballot is counted. The fact is, voter fraud is often difficult to detect and even more difficult to prosecute. You know, the Heritage Foundation...
Just despite the U.S. Attorney's Office nationally and in local jurisdictions having dedicated voter integrity units to root out that very thing. But continue.
Well, look, at the Heritage Foundation, we maintain a voter fraud database. It's not intended to be comprehensive. It only contains instances where there are proven instances of voter fraud, such as where a prosecution has been brought. But the fact is, fraud occurs. And look, many of these things that are being called restrictions are common sense measures to protect the integrity of the ballot, like requiring photo ID, like prohibiting vote trafficking and vote harvesting, which is where third parties gather dozens or even hundreds of absentee ballots to deliver to election officials. And so again, these are common sense measures designed to secure the safety and integrity of our electoral system.
All right, and then at the federal level, there are two bills that passed the U.S. House: For the People Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that would go the other direction, combat some of these laws in the states. U.S. Senator Dick Durbin was on the show last night, seemed to say that they're all but dead in the Senate. Let's take a look. Senator Durbin, two bills, voting rights bills, in the Senate that would counter what the president says is an assault on democracy. Do they have any chance of going anywhere?
No. At this point, there's no indication the Republicans will support either one. Let's face it, the demographics are not on the side of the Republican Party. The only way that they can engineer victories in the future is by districts drawn carefully, and secondly, by suppressing the vote of those who are going to vote against them.
Anil Shablani, President Biden gave a speech. Democrats have tried to pressure some senators that still support a filibuster to do away with it. But given what Senator Durbin says, it looks like that's not going to happen. So is this just spinning wheels at this point, trying to pass some of these federal bills?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical to continue to push for these federal bills, both the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which attempts to restore some of the damage done to the Voting Rights Act. These national measures are really critical as we're seeing states put in these restrictive measures. And these measures are really targeted at voters of color and disparately impacting those voters of color. So we absolutely need federal protections, both with this legislation and with being able to use the Voting Rights Act to challenge these measures. But while at the same time we push for those, there's critical work to be done at the community and grassroots level. There's nothing that stands in the way of working to ensure broad registration access and broad voting opportunities for voters in every state. And there's a lot that can be done at the local and state level. And so there needs to be movement on all fronts. But
Zach Smith, I'm sorry, I want to go back to the local and state level. You know, some of the controversial parts of some of these statewide proposals, giving partisan legislatures the ability to take over election administration, giving them more power to remove members of election boards. Should that be concerning to voters?
Well, look, the Constitution envisions and empowers state legislatures to set election rules and procedures. And what H.R. 1, H.R. 4 would purport to do is remove that authority from state and local leaders where it's always resided and federalize it and send it to Washington, D.C. And so this would be a fundamental shift in the way elections in our country are run. And if you look at even recent Supreme Court cases, like the one out of Arizona, where two of Arizona's voting laws were challenged. One law which required voters to vote in their assigned precinct on election day, and another one which prohibited vote trafficking, ballot harvesting. The Supreme Court looked at those and said, there's nothing discriminatory there. It doesn't violate the Voting Rights Act, and those laws are permissible. So that should be an encouraging decision for state legislatures around the country as they confront problems with voting systems in their states. And again, enact common sense measures like requiring photo ID to vote, like prohibiting vote trafficking and ballot harvesting, and other measures to make sure that we have safe, secure, free, fair elections.
And again, at this point, they have been safe, secure, free, fair in elections. At least the last election, by all accounts, was by the former administration members. It was. Anil, what about in Illinois? Some of the efforts undertaken here to expand access. What do you make of those?
Yeah, Illinois has made some very strong efforts to expand access, including passage of automatic voter registration, which we've been actively involved in working with groups to secure full implementation of that. So we've seen some positive things here, and we'll continue to work on that.
And I'm sorry, we're almost out of time. I just wanted to give Zach Smith your take on some of the efforts in Illinois, just very quickly.
Yeah, look, automatic voter registration, permanent absentee rolls, like Illinois has enacted, make elections less secure. And so if Illinois wants to get serious about expanding access while maintaining the integrity of their election process, they should enact things like the photo ID requirement, empower the state to check their database against different federal and state databases as well. And if they do those types of measures, they can provide access while making sure that elections are safe and secure.
All right. We'll have to leave it there for now. Our thanks to Zach Smith and Anil Shavlani. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paris.
And now to Brandis for a look at efforts to battle mental health stigmas in Latino communities. Brandis.
In Paris, we know Black and brown communities have been disproportionately affected by COVID-19 in both their physical and mental health. Now we'll look at the stigmas surrounding mental health in the Hispanic Latino community and what some are doing to break those generational barriers by providing services to their communities in different ways. Here's the newest face on the Chicago Tonight team, Joanna Hernandez, with the story.
And growing up, we didn't really speak about how you felt or why you felt things, you know, and often now as a grown up, I'm like, I know I feel something, but I don't know what it is, or I don't know how to explain it to someone else.
For the last 4 years, Ozzy Gamis and his partner Juan Queseda have been running Plant Shop Chicago in the Albany Park neighborhood. Gamis was born in Belize, surrounded by nature, and came to Chicago as a child. He never imagined that 31 years later, he would find his way back to his roots.
I started going to garden centers and visiting their houseplant section, or I think there was, you know, a couple of houseplants, plant shops that were available then. And I saw that it helped me just kind of clear my mind, pause, you know, leave work at work, come home to my home. you know, to my family, and that helped me a lot. So I basically wanted to take that and put my own twist into it, recreate it, and offer it to whoever wanted to come in.
Ozzy says that nurturing plants is a form of therapy for him, something that he says he's also noticing within his customers, plants helping them with their mental health.
But now that things are reopening back up, you see a new wave of people saying, you know, plants got them through quarantine and got them through being at home, stuck at home. Otherwise, they don't know what they would have done. And having those conversations with people, and you hear stories and they just tend to share things.
Ernestina Perez, a licensed clinical therapist, has made it her mission to help remove the stigma around Latino mental health.
I think a lot of it was just not even having the language to express what was happening. So, for example, you know, if somebody's depressed, maybe it's not seen as that, especially back then. There was no real language to say, you know, I think that I'm feeling really stuck, or I'm feeling saddened, or my mood is really down, and I think it's because of something that happened to me.
Last year, she founded Latinx Talk Therapy on Michigan Avenue, where she also offers immigration evaluations with the team of bilingual therapists.
The idea is to really be able to reach out to the community and people be able to see themselves in us and say, oh, maybe I could try, you know, that person looks like me, or they can understand me, and then people being more open to trying therapy at least.
About 16 miles from Perez's practice, Nestor Flores is Director of Behavioral Health Initiatives at Pilsen Wellness Center. He is also on a path to help others identify the symptoms and signs of mental wellness.
In my family, there was a tragedy. When I sought services for myself, for my son, we weren't able to find any culturally sensitive services that really, where we felt supported, where we felt seen. And so that really started me on this journey.
According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, only 1 in 5 Latinos with symptoms of a psychological disorder approach a doctor, and only 1 in 10 Latinos approach a mental health professional.
What happens with later generations is that, I mean, all of this gets passed on through belief systems that sometimes are verbalized and sometimes they're not.
Flores, who has worked in Pilsen for the last 9 years, says he's slowly starting to see changes.
I would say that 9-10 years ago, that was the case, that there was a stigma, that it was considered a service that was only needed if you were really having a mental breakdown. Nowadays, we've done a lot of inroads in the community, like the community, we're known in the community, and they know that if someone is struggling with any sort of symptom of depression, anxiety, stress, behavior with children, that they could come to us.
Gamis says his journey with mental health hasn't been easy, but he is taking steps to unpack those traumatic experiences.
It takes a lot of time to explore your mental health, to explore your feelings, to explore, you know, what you want to explain about yourself to the world. That growing up in a country that you aren't native to, you fill those empty spaces with work.
Ozzy Gamis is creating a space for others to learn about plants while discovering his own voice in a world where he once felt silenced.
I'm a father, my daughter's 4, and I think having a daughter or just a child kind of helps with that, because, you know, that's something you're teaching them and it's something they are learning.
And places like the Pilsen Wellness Center are going a step further by recruiting therapists from countries like Mexico and Colombia in an effort to help clients feel more comfortable.
And great story, Joanna. This is your first one for us. Welcome to the team.
Thank you so much. Everyone has been so welcoming. I'm just so excited to be back home in Chicago and just be able to have the opportunity to rediscover Chicago, right?
Exactly, because you've been, most recently you were in New York, but you're a Chicago native. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a Chicago native. I was living in New York for 5 long years. I learned a lot, but I'm just so excited to be able to return to my city. This has been a dream, and I'm just so excited to be part of the team. And again, be around mi gente, around my people.
Yeah, well, and you've got people here at Chicago tonight as well. Chicagoans all over are thrilled that you think it was 5 long years in New York City, but welcome home. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much.
And up next, a look at the debate over police in Chicago public schools. Stay with us. Today is the deadline for about 50 local school councils with Chicago Public Schools to decide whether they want to keep school resource officers. Those are Chicago officers, Chicago police officers, assigned to work on campus. So far, CPS data shows most of the schools are set to keep at least one SRO. Supporters argue they can be part of a comprehensive safety plan, but some students, parents, and community groups have pushed back, saying police aren't the only way to keep schools safe. Joining us to talk about an alternative model is Miaya Coleman, an organizer with Voices of Youth in Chicago Education, or VOICE, which has worked to help develop school safety plans that don't involve police. Miaya, thank you for joining us. We should say we also reached out to numerous people who support keeping school resource officers, but none of them were available to join us this evening. Miaya, my first question to you then is how did you get interested in the issue of school safety?
Hello everyone. So basically, I started doing this work at a very, very young age. My family are a big family of community activists and organizers. And so we started because one of my family members was actually gunned down in a gas station near my neighborhood home. And I, at the time, had gone through a very tough time. I was constantly put into detention. My grades were dropping, and I was actually around 8 years old at the time. And so when I was put into detention and when, I had security called on me because I would put my head down at 8 years old, I realized that, this wasn't normal, this wasn't right. And I just, got older and wanted to do more work inside of the school, and I saw how, we didn't have a lot of the resources that other schools had, like my family members or my friends that went to suburban schools. And so once I got to high school, I went to Austin High School. And when I got to high school, I noticed that why are we having to go through metal detectors? Why are we seeing police walk in our schools? And why is this, why are police being the only result to safety?
And so it sounds like you started asking a lot of important questions, and I'm sorry to hear about that experience with your family member when you were younger, being shot nearby. But, on the topic of schools, what do you hear from the students that you work with about what they would like to see for school safety? For example, we hear a lot about restorative justice.
So yes, definitely. So a lot of the young people that I work with are saying school feels like prison, and it shouldn't feel like that. We should be able to send our young people to school and get an education, and it shouldn't feel like a prison that students are going to, and they shouldn't have to walk through metal detectors. They shouldn't have to have police roam in the hallways, and so we want to take that dynamic of, police make us feel safe and say, getting the resources that we need makes us feel safe. And that is what a lot of our young people are doing. They're saying, hey, we think mental and behavioral health resources are very important to start to talk about. Keep young people a part of these conversations and understand that young people already know what they want. We don't need to continue telling young people what they should need and what they should want. Well,
I wanted to play a little bit of video here because last year we spoke with a member of Kenwood Academy's local school council, which at the time voted to keep its school resource officers because they believe that those officers play an important role. Let's take a listen.
They've been a resource, whether it's students who've endured violence en route to school or whether there's been violence surrounding the school that had to result in a soft lockdown. But those things were only occurred because we had those officers present to be the resource officers that they are intended to be.
And Miaya, what is your response to those who say that removing officers could make the schools less safe if there are problems with violence?
My response to that is school is meant to be able to educate young people, not make them feel imprisoned. I also feel like we need to, start asking our young people what they feel safety is, because at my organization, that is what we're doing. We're asking young people, what do you feel you need to feel safe? And a lot of the young people are saying, we need mental and behavioral health resources. We need our schools to not feel like, we're in prison. We need our schools to not be overly reliant on police all the time. You don't have to always feel safe with police. You can also have those peace programs, have those after-school programs. Why is it that we're so overly reliant on police officers to make us feel safe?
And Mia, before we let you go, Voice and other community groups, you've been working with Curie High School on a new safety plan. Curie did decide to get rid of its school resource officers. In a few seconds, what does that program look like? What does that new model look like?
So that's basically, for us, it looks like creating a conversation around what's the next step. And our next step is just basically creating a whole holistic approach to what safety looks like and making sure that we continue the conversation of what can we do so that we don't feel overly reliant on police officers, and what can we do to support the young people and their mental and behavioral health and the things that they need, and what can we do to keep young people a part of these conversations.
Okay, more conversations to be had going forward, I'm sure. Mia Coleman, thank you for having this conversation with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Certainly a lot more conversations as those votes by the local school councils take place on police resource officers. And still to come on Chicago Tonight.
This is a draft bill. We intend to show it to all of the stakeholders.
Can Senate Leader Chuck Schumer convince the president to legalize marijuana? Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in. And live dance, plus a Grant Park Music Fest, and Ravinia. Theater critic Hedy Weiss returns to Chicago Tonight with some news and reviews. But first, some more of today's top stories. Illinois' ban on rental evictions will lift at the end of this month. Governor J.B. Pritzker announced the move today, saying that eviction proceedings could begin August 1st and enforcement of eviction orders would start August 31st. Pritzker announced a new round of funding as well, worth $500 million to be offered for rental and landlord assistance as the moratorium phases out. It's been in place since the start of the pandemic, going all the way back to March of 2020. Chicago City Council members should not have the power to appoint ward superintendents to manage day-to-day functions of their district. That's the conclusion of a new report released today by Chicago Inspector General Joe Ferguson. The report states that the position does not meet the requirements to be Shackman exempt. That means politics should not play a role in any hiring. Instead, the report concludes the ward superintendent should come from a more traditional job hiring process within the City Department of Streets and Sanitation. The ward superintendent is in charge of managing things like garbage collection, street cleaning, and snow removal in each ward. Older people traditionally have had free rein to hire whomever they want for that position. Former Empire actor Jussie Smollett appeared again today in Cook County Court. Smollett is accused of staging an attack on himself, and his initial case was dropped by Cook County State's Attorney Kim Foxx, but a special counsel was appointed to look into it again. There was no judge's ruling today, and the next hearing is set for early August. And a court hearing today for an Iowa man accused of possessing multiple weapons and rounds of ammo at a Chicago hotel overlooking Ohio Street Beach. Keegan CASTEEL appeared briefly over Zoom for his second court appearance. He's facing 2 felony weapons charges for possessing the gun in Illinois without having a firearm owner's ID card here. Lawyers for CASTEEL call the charges, quote, baseless, and say prosecutors have no evidence that CASTEEL had ill intent and that he's a legal gun owner in his home state of Iowa. And this is all despite harsh words from Mayor Lori Lightfoot and Police Superintendent David Brown. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, and of course don't go very far because our Spotlight Politics team is taking a closer look at what happened today at the White House with Governor J.B. Pritzker and earlier this week with Police Superintendent David Brown. Here with all that and more are Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and of course Paris Good. You didn't go anywhere. So as we heard earlier, Governor Pritzker met with President Biden today to talk about infrastructure. Amanda, what's in it for Illinois?
What's in it for Illinois, first and foremost, is having a relationship with the White House. This, of course, after you had Pritzker, President Trump, butting heads, not getting along. So according to reporting by Cranes, actually, the governor had his own private one-on-one tour of the West Wing with Biden. Pritzker, of course, prior to becoming a governor himself and donating to his own campaign, had given a whole lot of money to Democrats throughout the years. So he says that he and Biden are close friends. So first of all, you have that relationship, and then coming with that relationship, ostensibly, a whole lot of projects and money coming to Illinois. That, of course, would be great timing for the governor, even as you have sort of the national prognosticators saying that Pritzker won't be in any trouble in 2022, as he's assumed to make his bid for a second term. Nonetheless, it sure can't hurt to be able to brag about having a whole lot more federal matching funds in Illinois being poised because of a law that he signed that puts Illinois in the position for that.
Now, anybody who has maybe driven around knows that, you know, the infrastructure needs some work. It needs some support. Is the president preaching to the choir here?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a sense, he certainly was. He did bring it wasn't just Governor Pritzker who was in this meeting. There was also some Republican representation. This is part of sort of a broader fight because while there does appear to be a bipartisan deal on what is known as sort of the more traditional description of infrastructure, roads, bridges, waterways, that sorts of things, and those are elements that Illinois' capital fund, by the way, does not pay for, that we need some federal support to get to. The broader fight is also over things like climate change and sort of this reconciliation package that you hear about.
Now, Senate Democratic leaders announced a possible breakthrough on that $3.5 trillion infrastructure plan that includes addressing climate change, as you just said, expanding Medicare, and help for struggling families for the next decade using reconciliation. Amanda, all 50 Democrats would need to vote for this. Are the progressives on board?
Yes, actually, there has been a lot made about are the moderate Democrats and the more progressive side of the party going to be able to reach an agreement? The thought constantly being, no, they're not going to be able to. But in fact, here it seems as if they are on board. You had sort of the leader of the progressive wing, Bernie Sanders, at least one of the leaders, saying that he supports this. For me, I'm a political reporter. We hear a lot about deals. So, you know, in Illinois, oh, they went back to Springfield to pass an electric plan, this big omnibus measure that, lo and behold, didn't happen until you actually have the votes. I, for one, am not going to believe that there is a deal until it is written, signed, sealed, delivered. Nonetheless, yes, you do have progressives backing this a little bit more than Biden had originally introduced, but less than the progressives had wanted. So, you know,
and I want to get Paris in here. Paris, what about Senators Manchin and Sinema? They've been the two Democratic swing votes on the conservative side.
Well, I think we're talking about two separate things here. So the $3.5 trillion, that's the budget proposal put out by Senate Democrats that would have to pass by reconciliation, would certainly get no Republican votes. And then the infrastructure package that is bipartisan. And I think with respect to that $3.5 trillion, Manchin himself has said that he's concerned with some of the climate change provisions in there. So that's going to be, I mean, the Democrats have no margin for error if they want to pass a vote like this through reconciliation. So they'd lose some of their progressive people like Bernie Sanders if they got rid of some of that stuff. But if they kept it, it seems like they'd lose some of the more moderate members. So they're going to have to negotiate with their own caucus on that bill.
Heather, now Democrats say that it's fully paid for, but how? More taxes?
Well, Amanda's right. This is one of those massive deals where the devil really is in the details. The proposals right now call for increase on wealthy Americans earning more than $400,000 a year, as well as an increase in the corporate tax from about 21% to somewhere around 25%. And there's also a lot of proposals in there that would give more money to the IRS to crack down on what Democratic senators call tax cheats. So these are rich people who use all sorts of tricks and things to avoid paying their fair share. And they say that would be enough to get to that $3.5 trillion mark. But again, until you've got a piece of legislation written and you've got votes counted, this is going to be a very long process. And there is, as Paris said, no room for error.
Now, let's talk about pot. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer is also pushing the legalization of cannabis. Take a listen.
We don't have the votes necessary at this point, but we have a large majority of our caucus for it. We're going to show it to the others and say, well, what don't you like? What do you like? And we'll see if we can get the support. But we're going to put our muscle behind it, our effort behind it, and we are going to get this done ASAP.
Paris, for the state of Illinois, marijuana revenues were in the hundreds of millions of dollars during the pandemic. Are federal lawmakers reading the tea leaves and thinking there should be more for the feds, too?
I think that Schumer's move in press conferences is more political and more as a motivating factor for the 2022 midterms. Maybe it's something that drives voters to the polls because, you know, the decriminalization of marijuana federally is very popular. Something like 70% of the country supports it, but it doesn't look like it has a majority in any, at least in the Senate. There's some moderate Democrats that are a little wishy-washy about it, and many Republicans that are not so clearly on board. So, I think President Biden hasn't really said he's completely on board. So I think I think Democrats like voting rights, and you saw Dick Durbin last night say there's not going to be any action on the voting rights bills. I think they're talking a lot about this now because they want action, but same with marijuana. It's something that's a popular issue that perhaps can help motivate their voters in 2022.
So shifting to someone else who was at the White House this week, Police Superintendent David Brown. Here's what he said yesterday about the additional law enforcement coming. Take a look.
The strike force will focus on the flow of guns, which includes buyers and sellers of illegal guns. We'll have more to come. We'll have more to come on that particular issue. We'll roll out this strike force plan.
Okay, so Superintendent Brown saying more to come. We know that Attorney General Garland and President Biden said that more ATF agents will be sent for the strike force, but we know that Brown isn't giving a whole lot of details. Paris, what makes this federal help different from previous years and previous presidents' federal help?
I really wish I could answer that, Brandis, because as you mentioned, he's saying more details will come. And it seems like every administration and attorney general have promised things like more federal agents to come in and tackle gun violence and to help solve gun crime. And given the fluctuating rates over the last several years, it's really negligible whether that federal help really has made a dent in any of this gun violence. So it seems like they want to go after illegal purchases, although I should say that federal and Illinois state laws are very lax when it comes to being able to track down lost or stolen weapons or illegal purchases. There isn't even an electronic database of gun purchases. By law, gun stores are not allowed to keep that. So intentionally, these laws are pretty tricky to enforce. So we'll have to see what the superintendent's referring to.
Meanwhile, Heather, Mayor Lightfoot has focused on the flow of illegal guns coming into the city. Senator Durbin on our show just yesterday said that gun legislation isn't really realistic. How can officials stem the flow of illegal weapons, illegal guns?
This is really the crucial question. And when Lightfoot is asked about what needs to be done to stamp down the violence that has really swept the South and West Side in the last couple of weeks, that's her answer. Her answer is we need comprehensive gun control. And when sort of confronted with the fact that that's not going anywhere in the Senate anytime soon, she's really been at a loss. Now, the mayor's also increased funding for things like violence prevention programs, and she's sort of pushed a whole of government approach where she has every city department responsible for reducing violence. But again, that's not very different than we've seen in years past, and it of course is yet to really show any sort of meaningful change in reducing violence.
Now in City Council, Heather, Chicago City Council members are going to start drawing new ward boundaries for the next decade. What happened today?
Well, we are just a couple of weeks away from the opening of the map room at Chicago City Hall, and that is where aldermen will crowd around computers with special mapping software, and they will get down to the nitty-gritty of dividing the city into 50 wards of about 54,000 people each, and it is really going to shape the balance of power in the city for the next decade, and I am so excited that it's finally happening.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall, Heather. But is this the same old backroom dealing that's going on without an independent commission to draft the maps?
It absolutely is. It's not any different than the way it worked in 2011 or 2001 or back in the 90s or back in the 80s. And that is not what Mayor Lori Lightfoot promised when she was elected. She said that that was really a relic of the past and that that Chicago needed to bring sunshine into the process. But politicians are traditionally loath to give up their own power, and there's no greater power than picking your own voters, and that's what's about to start happening at Chicago City Hall.
Yeah, perhaps the only change might be that the software is even better, so that you can get more precise about choosing your voters.
And this,
That's perhaps the only change.
And the mayor campaigned on it. She came on Chicago Tonight talking about when we need to have maps that are contiguous to their neighborhoods and not a neighborhood like Englewood divided up into six wards. But what happened 10 years ago, what this always is, and what it's going to be this year, it sort of becomes sort of a battle between Latino aldermen, African-American aldermen, white aldermen, because as Heather's mentioned on this show, you've got the population of the black population in Chicago going down, but black aldermen do not want to lose the number of seats they have. Latino population has gone up. They want to gain proportional amount of seats, and this is where sort of the backroom deal making happens. And the mayor is going to have leverage here she needs all the support and allies on city council she can get. She has leverage in this process.
Paris, to that end, what is she doing to move it to the present, to the future?
If I could get into the mayor's head, I would tell you. I don't know. All I know is what she has said in the past. I'm sure she's serious that she doesn't want these neighborhoods to be carved up into 6 different wards. That doesn't do constituents any good. But again, this is African Americans. They want to keep the number of seats they have, and so she's got a little leverage there. Latinos want to gain seats because they've gained population. She's got leverage there, and they're chits that she can use.
Now, Heather, the state eviction ban is officially ending. You reported on this today. What does this mean for people who are behind rent due to the pandemic?
Well, it means that their reprieve from eviction court proceedings is ending, and ending very soon. Now, the governor said, it's been 17 months. It's time to get sort of back to the normal order of business now. There is still a significant number of rental assistance grants available that people who are behind can apply for through Sunday. And he encouraged people to do that. But the fact of the matter is that the state has already received requests for more than $700 million in help. The state only has about $500 million in this round. There will be more money available in the fall, but we are about to see whether this fears of eviction tsunami hitting the state and the city, we are about to see whether those concerns are going to prove true.
And briefly, COVID-19 infection rates are ticking up with the new, more transmissible Delta variant. Amanda, I'm going to let you have the last word quickly. With all this happening, is there confusion over masking students for the fall semester?
There most certainly is. Right now, you have the State Board of Education following CDC guidelines, which call for masking for those who have not been vaccinated. And by the way, that, of course, is younger children who are not even eligible. But there's a lot of pushback, a lot of concern from parents at this point in time.
Okay, thanks to our Spotlight Politics team. As usual, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. Up next, theater critic Hedy Weiss with a look at outdoor dance and music offerings. But first, a look at the weather.
She still writes for our WTTW News website, but Hedy Weiss hasn't been on Chicago Tonight since February of 2020. That's because we all know what happened soon after. As the world shut down for COVID, so too did music halls, dance venues, and of course theaters. And now they're slowly coming back, slowly but surely that is. And joining us again finally is Hedy Weiss. Hedy, great to see you. Welcome back.
Oh, great to see you too, Paris. I wish I were in the studio, but that's okay.
Hopefully soon we'll have you here, but you have been in person at some performances over the last few weeks. How has that felt?
Well, the one thing I sort of had to hold back was to shout that line from the Frankenstein film, "It's alive," because the audience was alive and the performers were alive, and most of them were not covered in masks, so they could actually breathe and you could see their facial expressions. So it was a revelation and it was wonderful.
It's just something magnetic about being in person around other people, witnessing a performance at the same time. And you witnessed the American Ballet Theater at Millennium Park. Tell us about that performance.
I did. It's part of a series that they're doing. It's a bus and truck tour, which is unusual for them. They usually have hotels and all the rest. But they are going to a variety of cities, and they stopped on the stage of Grand Park, the Pritzker Pavilion, and they did 4 small works. A very mixed program, because I think they knew that it was a general audience, not maybe the audience that would have gone to the auditorium theater to see them. And so there were 2 pieces that were classical on point shoes and 2 pieces to jazz. And the audience was packed. It was all the way out on the lawn. The weather was beautiful, and it was a great thing to see.
So kind of like a greatest hits of ballet, and
actually some new pieces specifically done. Well. Yeah, specifically done for this kind of performance. I think they knew what they needed to do. The one distracting thing was that it was videoed, and there was a huge video that kind of magnified it for the audience that was sitting on the lawn, and it was very distracting because it was kind of looking at a grandiose Zoom rather than the live performers.
We've had enough of Zoom, as you and I both know. All right, let's move on up to Ravinia, the first true season for the new conductor, Marin Alsop. How has she fit in conducting the CSO at Ravinia?
Well, she's been conducting it for a number of summers, but she actually got the title, and she's the curator, and she's doing some interesting programming. The first one opened with the Star Spangled Banner, and everybody was happy to sing that together. And then she programmed a piece by a female conductor called Fanfare for an Uncommon Woman, which was kind of an homage to Copeland, but also very much its own thing, feminist. And then it went on to an absolutely brilliant performance by a pianist who has roots in both Mexico and in Chicago. His name is Jorge Osorio, and he played a fabulous Mozart concerto with the orchestra. They were in beautiful sync, and then they closed with a Beethoven symphony. And I have to say that the CSO, which has been playing on Zoom in various capacities, they have not lost a thing. They are fantastic.
As I understand, they close with Beethoven 7, which is
Beethoven 7,
monumental symphony that I've seen.
It is, but the interesting thing was that it was actually very intimate and very delicate, and it was an interesting interpretation.
I've seen it done at the CSO, big and grand and loud and fast.
And,
so that
and bombastic kind of.
Yeah.
And this was, I would say, I mean, it had a ton of energy, but it was an interesting interpretation.
All right, let's move back down to Millennium Park. The Grant Park Music Festival, free music festival, is back at Millennium Park. I was there for the 4th of July program. How was your experience?
Right. Well, I passed on the 4th of July, and I went to a standard concert. Unfortunately, the weather was not great, and that's the problem with outdoor things. In the middle of Samuel Barber's beautiful string elegy, it was pouring down, and people were moving, and it was distracting. But the musicians in the Grand Park Festival Orchestra are terrific. They opened with a Vivaldi piece, and they had the chorus up on risers, and it was, and then they closed with a Brahms symphony. And the conductor, Carlos Calmar, is fantastic about, he knows that it's a more popular audience again than the traditional concert hall. And he did a really engaging introduction to each piece that I think really helped the audience.
He did that. For 1812, he came out and talked about how it had nothing to do with the United States when Tchaikovsky wrote it for Russia. It was quite humorous and quite funny. You usually don't hear conductors talk like that in between songs. So what are you looking forward to either the rest of this summer or the fall?
Right. Well, I'll just tell you one thing. I wanted to just call out Garrick Olson, the pianist, who gave a solo concert of Brahms before the opening of the CSO the day before. And I felt really badly for him because, you know, there are 3,500 seats at Ravinia, And he had, what did he have? He had like maybe 250 people in the audience. So that was kind of sad. What am I looking forward to? Well, I'm looking forward to Maestro Riccardo Muti coming back in September for his residency there. And I think he's really looking forward to it. I think he's terribly homesick in a way, although he's in Italy, which
he's
is
in
not
Ravenna,
so bad.
Italy. I mean, there are worse places to be quarantined.
Yeah. Right, you could have the pandemic in another place. That wouldn't be half as nice. But I think he really misses his orchestra, and they are going to do the usual variety of pieces. And then they just announced a great season for the rest of the time, October, November, and a lot of holiday shows. So I think they're gearing up. If everyone wears their mask, we might be able to continue to go to the live performance.
All right, a lot to look forward to, and we look forward to more reviews from you. And for more arts and entertainment, visit the Chicago Summer Festival Guide on our website. And once again, our thanks to Hedy Weiss. Great to see you.
Thanks, Paris.
And that is our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. The new child tax credit begins. What parents need to know about those monthly payments.
And the story of a forgotten Frank Lloyd Wright apartment building on the South Side in our Ask Jeffrey. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.